So we all know how popular the DJI Osmo Pocket 3 is for vlogging. But what if we use it for photos? Well, this is a situation that will likely never really happen to me, where I only have the Osmo Pocket 3 as my camera, because I mainly use it for my vlogs and I'm a photography vlog channel. But yeah, your needs are probably going to be different from mine, right? Maybe you don't really have other alternative cameras with you other than, let's say, your phone. And they do say that the best camera is the one that you have with you. Very debatable, but it sounds very motivational. Before we start off the night street photography part, I wanted to share these photos I took during my lunch break that day, which didn't have the POV footage of the moments before I captured them. I was walking around the central area of Hong Kong looking mainly for neat compositions first, given how busy the streets were during the lunch rush, and tried to time or spot subjects relatively isolated to be my main focal point. I think I did a relatively okay job in finding some balance within the busyness of the streets. I'll talk more about my thoughts about the image quality and experience later on, so stay tuned. Just FYI, the Osmo Pocket 3 has a 1-inch sensor, which is larger than an iPhone camera, and in terms of build, it's going to be small, it's lightweight, and that's why it's going to be marketed as a pocket camera, and you're just going to look like you're carrying a hard package when you slide it in. So that means when you're using it in public for doing some vlogging and taking photos, it's going to have that discrete factor, giving it a bonus point for me. So in terms of photo settings, I will be using auto exposure and auto white balance because I don't really want to be fiddling around the camera settings whenever I take the photos, especially that the touch screen is going to be quite small with the Osmo Pocket 3. And I do intend to edit the photos later on in Lightroom, so I am going to be shooting in RAW and JPEG. And because the Osmo Pocket 3 comes with a built-in gimbal, we also need to consider the gimbal mode, which I will set to the follow option. There is going to be some sort of delay whenever you pan and tilt, and that means that it's not going to be very efficient for street photography, and you need to get better at anticipating a shot, because if you don't consider the time delay, once you set it up, the gimbal might still be following along and the moment has already passed. I did also note that it takes some time for the photos to be saved in the SD card, so I don't know if my SD card just sucks or it's just really a thing with the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. For the first few photos, I walk along my favorite spot in the city, the harbor towards Central Pier. It offers some very beautiful cityscapes as background and a nice area to run and do some workouts. The people around made for some interesting subjects, and I even saw a workout group doing some outdoor boxing. I'm also very thankful I didn't get beat up for taking sneaky shots. I think the biggest challenge that I'll be facing today in using the Osmo Pocket 3 for street photography is that it has a fixed focal length of 20mm. And if you buy the Creator Combo, you also have a wide-angle adapter, turning it into a 15mm. So I do think that for landscape photography, it might be a decent choice. So I don't know if that's a future video idea, so let me know in the comments if it's going to be interesting enough. DJI Osmo Pocket 3 for landscape photography. But for street photography, it's going to be a completely different story. Because you see, for street photography, I mostly use 40mm or 50mm focal length. And I think wide-angle street photography is just a little bit too chaotic for me. You just include so much in your field of view, so many distractions. So it will need some getting used to. And also, the Osmo Pocket 3 only has 9 megapixels. So I do think cropping is not going to be a good choice. So that means that you really need to nail your compositions. And if you want some really good intimate street photo shots, you need to be very, very close to your subjects. So I'm still not so comfortable in doing that. I decided to take the ferry and go to the Tsim Sha Tsui harbor to hunt for my shots, and these were the photos I took on the ride. Just admiring the harbor view from inside the ferry, a very classic Hong Kong experience. The clouds were quite low that day that it covered some of the taller skyscrapers, which made for a special sight. Since the space was quite cramped inside the ferry, I photographed a few of the passengers and found these lovely ladies wearing colorful clothes and just having fun together, which I found to be quite amusing. So in terms of user experience, I do find it quite bizarre having to hold the camera upright rather than the normal way that you're used to. And in terms of the compositions, I do find it a little bit trickier because the screen is quite small and it's hard to assess whether or not you already composed the shot correctly. And unless you really zoom into the photos, you're probably not going to be able to notice the minor distractions that we try to avoid in photography. For example, including unnecessary things within the frame, the spacing with your subjects, or your cutoff points within the edges. So I do find those to be a little bit more challenging to do in the Osmo Pocket 3 for photography. I walk around the cultural center of Hong Kong to find my next shots. I thought there were a lot of nice architectural designs around I could use to frame up my subjects, and pairing it up with the wide-angle field of view of the Osmo Pocket, it gave for some interesting compositions. At first I expected that because the lens is wide, the distortion of straight lines will appear odd and unnatural, especially in man-made stuff like walls and buildings, but turned out they're not too bad. Let me know what you think. Started raining, which is a problem because the Osmo Pocket 3 is not weather sealed. So probably not a good idea to keep going. So I think I'll just head home now and then we can talk more about the photos. So you've already seen some of the edited photos at this point, and man, these are not what I expected. These are actually quite good results. I mean, if you blow up the images, then of course you're going to note that they don't really have a lot of resolution and detail. But I wouldn't totally discard these results. I mean, I don't really take a lot of raw iPhone photos, but I can already tell that these have much better image quality. I mean, that's going to be expected, right? I mean, the Osmo Pocket 3 has a much bigger sensor than an iPhone camera. And in terms of the lens, the Osmo Pocket 3 does have a fixed f2 aperture. So that means that it's going to give you that natural bokeh or background blur. Not very comparable to, bigger cameras. But in terms of comparing it to an iPhone, it's going to appear more natural because the iPhone, when you use the portrait mode, it actually applies an algorithm and it's more computational photography rather than the natural blur that you get from opening up your aperture. What really blew my mind in this experiment is how well it performed under low light conditions. I mean, there's still going to be some noise within the shots, that's going to be expected, but personally, I didn't find them too distracting. And in terms of the dynamic range, it was also really, really good. I took the photos slightly underexposed because I didn't want to blow out my highlights from the street lights or the building lights. And I still had enough shadow details for me to be able to pull them back up in post-processing. In terms of the shutter speed used, most of these shots were taken with slow shutter speed, like 1/15 of a second. So there's actually quite a lot of motion blur in terms of the moving subjects within the frame, which is actually something that appealed to me. It added some more motion and movement within the compositions of the frame. But because the Osmo Pocket 3 has a built-in gimbal, then there's going to be some image stabilization and no complaints over there. So the still objects remain very still and sharp. Overall, this was just an odd thought experiment that I will probably never really do again because I just find it very bizarre using a small vlog camera as something for photography. And in terms of the user experience, I think I'd still pretty much prefer having to interact with the physical body of my camera, updating the dials whenever I want to change my settings. And I think that experience is just something that you can never really take away from the joys of doing photography. It's just really, really not the same. But then again, if this is something that you want to do, or if you don't have other alternative cameras other than your phone and you have the Osmo Pocket 3, then go ahead, knock yourself out. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy this video and thought experiment, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.